mode.
Hi, and welcome. My name is Julie Stewart, and I'm a field training coordinator here at the Kentucky Autism Training Center. I appreciate your attendance, and I'm just going to go over some housekeeping type things and let you know about who I am, and then we'll get started with the content. During the webinar, feel free to ask questions or make comments throughout the presentation by typing your question in the question box and clicking send. I'll be able to see that, and I'll try to answer them along the way. If I can't answer it just then, I'll acknowledge it and say I'll answer it at the end, or give you another form to have that conversation with me. And then if you cannot see the question box, click the orange box with the white arrow in the upper right corner of your screen to open the question box area. I'll be answering those questions throughout the presentation as well as at the end of the training. Speaking of questions, we had someone that has already typed up a question. She gave me some details about her child attending a group at Vanderbilt, and she was acknowledging the videos that I posted on the discussion, Moodle site, and she was asking if the videos are public. I took those from YouTube and spliced them together, so I don't have any type of release forms for the people in the videos, but if they're posted on YouTube, they're public. So yes, those are public videos. If you want the longer video, I cut those videos out of different videos. So the person who asked the question, just send me an email and I can give you the link to the YouTube video that I used, because I saved it and then transferred it into a one video for all the different videos. So moving on, a little bit about myself to put in context why I'm doing this training. I did my undergrad in early childhood, and I'm IEC trained, which is the Interdisciplinary Early Childhood Education here in Kentucky. And also, I taught public preschool under that certification for a couple years, and then went to get my master's full-time and ended up at the University of Washington in Seattle. While I was there, I worked at a school that was called the Experimental Education Unit. However, the school included a program called DATA, which is Developmentally Appropriate Treatment for Autism. They both had a preschool program and what we called baby data, or data, which served infants and toddlers. So what happened is that the students who were diagnosed on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum, they would attend preschool in the morning or preschool in the afternoon in the same building, and then they would come to us in the morning or afternoon, the flip of their preschool program. And in the middle time, we would have all 16 students on the spectrum in the classroom, clearly with a lot of adult support. However, we would run a preschool class just as you would, having it be, when they entered, it was lunchtime. So we'd have lunch, and we had play court, which was like the recess. They called it play court because they didn't have a playground, and it was an urban school. And then we would have circle, and we would have centers, and then after centers, it would be time for the PM kids to go to PM preschool and the AM kids to stay in PM data program. So it was an extended school day for students with autism. Also during grad school, I did a lot of home therapy for students on the spectrum, mostly toddlers. And so from that perspective, I entered in with a developmental understanding of teaching preschool, and then this program really gave me a behavioral background and set me a foundation of understanding how to implement behavioral principles in applied settings. So melding those two together is what I hope to be able to share somewhat of today, as well as the following webinar series. So with that, we'll get started. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them along the way. So our agenda today is that I really want to build a case for why it's important. A lot of preschool teachers really struggle with students with autism, and I want to share why I think that's true, and you can give me any type of concerns or comments. Then we'll review some environmental structure and visual supports, which preschool teachers are really good at for the most part, but there are some specific types of visual supports that they may not be aware of or understand their use. And then finally, we're going to go through some organizational and instructional planning tools, which is something that I was unaware of prior to being in that graduate program. Why are preschoolers with autism challenging to teachers? One reason is, if you attended the first webinar, we really talked about what it means to have autism. So having that unique triad of deficits really presents a different, unique individual. that student is a student you've not had before. Even if you had a student with autism prior, because it's a spectrum disorder, that student is going to present different unique needs and not just exactly like the other kid before them. And that's true for all disabilities, but really for autism. And so you could have a student who, oh, I've had a kid with high functioning autism. Oh, I had that kid. I'll be fine. Then the next student presents a whole different complex needs and complex unique deficits, I guess I would say, and that student's motivation levels, their different types of motivation, the way they communicate, the way they do interact, and then what are their repetitive, restricted, stereotype behaviors. And also because as I mentioned, it's a spectrum disorder, so everyone's going to present these different unique needs, and they're just becoming who they are, just as all those little ones are that we serve in early childhood. So along with that, with their disability, it really impacts their experience in preschool. And finally, much like most of you probably, if you are preschool teachers, your certification program was very, very focused in developmental and play therapies, thinking about theorists such as Piaget and Vygotsky, and so what your focus is how do we set up an arrangement, set up instruction where all students can learn, and we'll scaffold their learning from one place to another. And so the idea of having to do direct, explicit instruction, which is what we'll be talking about in the third webinar, is not something that you were taught how to do. You were taught how to run really good large groups, small groups, and how to interact with students on a one-on-one kind of setting, but not in an instructional way, not in a systematic instructional way. So your programs really didn't prepare you for students with autism, because they respond the best under behavioral principles and using a behavioral approach. So I know that most of us had that one paragraph all about Skinner or B.F. Skinner in our textbooks, and a lot of our professors would make us think that behaviorism or behavioral approach was as if it was a three-headed monster, something you never want to do in early childhood. It would never work. And it wasn't until I was in grad school when that was the main focus. It was kind of challenging because I was coming in with a developmental understanding, and all of my colleagues were all these super, super behavioral folks. And so trying to put those two together and marry those two, I found challenging, but I found now is the most rewarding, because I know how to run a really good developmental preschool, but also meet the needs of my unique students and their deficits. So if you've had a student with autism, think about those challenges and think about what's been challenging for you, and feel free to share those in the question area. Moving on, we're going to talk about environmental supports. Preschool teachers are really, really, really good at environmental arrangement, environmental supports, because we are guided by documents such as the Eckers, who, when we do those evaluations of the classroom and set up our classroom based on those evaluations, we know what early childhood and young children need to provide them with a solid educational experience. And so once you leave preschool, early elementary is pretty good at it, and then as you get older and older and older, by the time you get to high school, visual supports and labeling and providing more information for students about their environment really just disappears. You might not even have signs saying, put the dictionaries here. You just have to figure it out. And for students with autism, that's very difficult. We know that a lot of students, not all students, but a lot of students with autism really do respond as visual learners or to visual supports. So we want to be able to have an enriching environment for those students that really provides them with more information than hoping they get it, or that when they're there we expect them to know what to do. So we're going to go through a different list, but looking at this one picture, you can see there's stuff on the walls. Everything has its place. It looks like it's very clean. So we're going to talk about some of the general tips and then some specific types of environmental arrangement that would be good for students with autism. So when you are setting up your classroom, just like that last picture, you know, we couldn't see the whole classroom, but everything in that picture looked like it had a place and a purpose. That you really are setting up in visual boundaries for different areas. So if you are having the manipulative table also be the snack table or be the art table, that table is labeled based on, and they know, and they, with some sort of visual representation, they're able to know that today we're going to use, it's now time for snack. And that if you're going to have boundaries, that they are, of course, not above, you can still see the whole room, but you're having at least 2 boundaries to determine that space. Having a carpet, having tape on the floor to know that this is where I play with these toys, having spots on the floor designated, and really thinking about, so for example, in the manipulative or block area, sometimes I go into classrooms, and we go to lots of different classrooms, and classrooms have countless numbers of blocks out. So many that no one can play with them in the time allotted. Or you're that teacher who has the giant box of Legos, and what happens? Of course, they go and just dump them out. Well, if that child has, that's an easy skill, easy one-step direction to follow. Get the toys out. But then putting the toys away, it sometimes becomes wrangling a child, or hand over hand doing it all, or the paraprofessional or teacher doing it, because you're so focused on that next transition. So making sure that you have a place and purpose for everything, which turns out to be that you're going to have a less cluttered room. I'm not saying to have a sterile room that has nothing on the walls and nothing on the floor, and it's not colorful and it's not creative, but thinking about, does that have a purpose? Does that sign, the weather bear, do we use it every day, or is it just hanging on the wall? Is that sign about the weather, or about space, or about colors? Am I referencing that when it's necessary? Because the more you have, the more distracting it could possibly be, as well as the more things I can manipulate and not use effectively or appropriately. So when limiting the amount of clutter, because a lot of teachers also find themselves like placing stuff on tops of shelves, which then clearly is not a student resource, but it's there. You have to think about making sure that everything's kind of streamlined and has a place and purpose. And finally, asking yourself this question really will give you a lot of information. Tom, our made-up student, does Tom know what he is supposed to be doing at all times in my classroom without physical guidance? I'm not saying this is you, but a lot of preschool teachers and a lot of early childhood professionals, they get a student with autism, and they say to me, or they don't intend to, but they let the cat out of the bag before they know who I am, of saying, well, we don't really know what to do with him, so we just let him run around the classroom. Or, you know, he'll play for a while, and then we just let him do what he wants. He doesn't really like to play with other kids, and it's not their fault, because they don't really understand what he is supposed to do, but really he's supposed to be doing what the other kids are doing. And if we're not providing him with the right amount of support, and looking at more support options versus just physical guidance, then Tom is never going to become independent. And in the next webinar, we'll talk about prompting and how do you fade prompts. But really thinking about it as, we don't want to have our hands clutched in Tom's the whole entire time. We don't want to constantly have it be where Tom is in contact, physical contact with an adult, and that I'm pulling him to circle, I'm pulling him to lunch, I'm taking him down the hallway, because you're not holding the hands of all the other kids. So what you're doing now is not teaching Tom independence, not fading that physical prompt, but that you're really just getting you and Tom through the day without him hurting someone or without following the direct. He hasn't learned anything. So getting him and playing defense to keep him there really isn't going to do anything for him. So when we think about the physical environment, arranging the environment does a lot of things. So I'm just going to list these out, because a lot of people don't think about what really the research says that arranging the environment can support. And one of the big ones is decreasing challenging behavior. The reason I have challenging behavior, and that's a whole nother module or webinar, is that I'm trying to communicate something to you. I want something, I want to get out of something, I need your attention. And so if I'm exhibiting these challenging behaviors, I'm trying to communicate. Visuals will help me understand what and where to go, how to do things, when things are happening. I will be feeling much more comfortable in your classroom if those questions are answered for me, and that then will then decrease my challenging behaviors. You know, I can know what's going to happen and when, and I will try to communicate more because I know that. Staff efficiency is great, again, because perhaps I'm independent during some of my day versus a staff member having to pull me to and fro with a hand over hand. So we're going to go through, and I took this from an article that I posted on the Moodle board, and it's from an article in Teaching Young Children, and it's called Take a Look, Visual Supports for Learning. And I really liked how they broke it down into really simple ways of understanding. And so they talked about how we use visuals to help children understand where to find things and where things are located, what will happen and when, what to do and how to do it, how to interact with others, and then finally how to communicate thoughts, feelings, and choices. Visuals are used for lots of other things as well, but in general, it's important that we are able to think of it in a very simple way. All right, so we're going to start with where to find things and where. All right, well, if you're looking at this, where to find things and where things belong, you're really, really good at this as preschool teachers. You have shelves labeled, you have cubbies labeled, you have names on things, you have picture labels. You are very good at this for the most part. But there's a lot of strategies that you may not use later on that we'll talk about. So if you can think about it, down here at the block, the block shelf, a student with autism, not all students, but students with autism who have high levels of structure and they're very rigid on the following rules and being responsive to those rules, they're going to be a kid who at cleanup time will meticulously put those blocks away. They will have no problem at all cleaning up because they enjoy the process of cleaning up when there's that much structure available. However, again, a lot of people, thinking back to that place and purpose and not having clutter, students who, when that shelf is presented, who then just throw the blocks onto the shelf. A lot of kids do that. So if you think about the top shelf, do your blocks go all the way to the top? Do they need to? Do we need to have 10 big blocks every day? So thinking about kind of minimizing the amount of materials that are available. For example, having this many 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 different manipulatives for choice. That's great. We want to give children choice, but maybe for a kid with autism, we may want to just put out a few different choices, or we allow them to play with whatever they select and then have a real good schedule for cleanup. And we'll talk a little bit about activity schedules, but not fully and comprehensively. This is really good strategy. So if a student, and the only thing is that we can't expect just because we have labels that a student with autism would be able to follow the design or follow the directions basically. So if a student doesn't know how to match color, they're not going to be able to put these crayons in the appropriate tins. But if we teach that matching color, so we say put with yellow or put with same, and we do it discreetly, that student now has that skill mastered. When they're in those areas and it's time to clean up, it'll be obvious that they know to put those colors in the matching containers. Down here, oftentimes when we're following certain curriculums, they'll tell us how we're supposed to label our cubbies. I know that creative curriculum has the different symbols for students. Our kids with autism, because they are such concrete thinkers, that symbol is going to be difficult. And so thinking about, can we start labeling our cubbies by pictures of the kid with their name, and then fading the picture to just the name, and then maybe the name paired with the object. So we're teaching that visual versus expecting them to know what the visual means and how to use it. Next is what will happen and when. And this is where the schedules come into place. On the far side over here, this is a schedule. It's a written schedule, and it's clearly for an older student. But if your student is a reader, there's no reason for you to use pictures. Maybe they need pictures to help them in context, but mostly if they're a reader, use text. Some of the video that I posted was going over schedules from the OCALI, which is Ohio Center for Autism and Low Incidence, and they have whole modules on their autism internet modules that are free to anyone that you can go through and learn a lot more about visual supports. And if that's something that you're interested in implementing in your home or in your classroom that you're not doing right now, don't think that all students will come in and use a line drawing. These are line drawings. The bathroom visual schedule here is our line drawings. Then you could have actual digital pictures. You could have objects that represent. You could have that you have a matching schedule. There are all kinds of schedules. You could have circular schedules, perpendicular or vertical schedules, whole day schedules. And then we come into things that what a lot of teachers do are whole day schedules, but they never really teach the student to be independent with their schedule. They're constantly saying, check your schedule, or prompting the student to go to their schedule, take off the item, transition. So they're prompting, but they're not taking data to know how are they fading those prompts. So without a whole day schedule is great, but then thinking about maybe a within activity schedule, going to the potty. So it's telling me this is an activity schedule, telling me how. I may need a within activity of how to pull up, or pull up my pants. I may need to have a schedule within that showing me what to do, that I'm reaching down and the different steps. It could be the same as if I'm in if I'm going to center time or work time, and I know how to do things, but I still need some support, something like this, that at the dollhouse, I put the baby in the bed, I rock the baby in the bed, I sing Twinkle Twinkle. Sounds really, really basic, but students with autism, like we talked about in the first webinar, have a struggle being following gross motor or any type of functional play skills, because I don't have those levels of play, because I'm not an observational learner. I don't learn as much as other kids. I do learn through observation, but I don't learn as much as other students and other typical developing kids do. So you may need to teach me functional play skills, provide me with this visual, and when I'm in the area, the visual's there for me to be able to complete those steps and move on to a new section. And so for a kid who can read, it may be that they have a written schedule, but you're going to have something there that is really easy for them to follow. And it could just be pictures as well. Like you could have one, the piggy bank, 2, shape sorter, 3, pegboard. So those are 3 things I want to do during in the manipulative area, and then I'm all done. And each one would have a finished. I would take it off and I would be finished. And so you have to think about if that's going to be something that's going to be helpful for you or for your student, and what is their reading level, what is their independent level. All right, I'm going to check in on the questions. We had a couple of questions, and somebody said, my coworker is with me and she cannot connect to the webinar. What should she do? Was she registered for the webinar? If not, she can call the contact number here at the KTC, and we'll try to troubleshoot for her. And then someone asked, as far as the IEP goes, what do you make sure is in the IEP to benefit the classroom? Can you give me more information? So to benefit the classroom, what do you mean by that? And in general, all I can say about every student's IEP with autism is that we know that their present level should reflect their disability, and so their present level should include things that are connected to that is connected to their social communication, and then those repetitive restricted behaviors. And so maybe that's a behavioral or adaptive goal that's causing them, maybe an on-task goal, because that's related to the fact that they're off-task because they're doing their stereotypy, or something like that. So we see a lot of IEPs that they have autism, but they have no social goals. They have autism, they have no communication goals. And that's a really kind of a red flag, because hopefully in their present levels, they should be at a different level, like have a deficit in those areas if they have autism. Other than that, just either email me or give me some follow-up information, and I'll check in a little bit. Okay, great. I'm glad that your friend was able to get on her iPad. So we'll transition back to the training. So here we go. If we're having circle time, and this may be one kid, this looks like a whole group schedule for songs. And so, but a student with autism may have their very own independence, so then they can pull those off as they go. I'm going to show you an example of that here in a second with the student that we worked with. And then you have the cute little girl with her 5 more minutes to play. When I was a preschool teacher, we'd go around and tell all the kids, that was their job, to go tell the kids they had 5 more minutes to play. And so for a student with autism, even if we had maybe the sign the sign language sign for play on there, and they knew that symbol as play, they would be able to connect that, oh, okay, what she's saying in this visual, that maybe they would have more information that way. So let's look at this. And I'm going to pop up all four. And the cute little guy in the number 4, as you can see him, he is a student that we worked with in one of our training sites. And he was a student who, when I first came in to the classroom, I was told that I didn't know where he was. And I was told that he was not able to be in the classroom. And so that really kind of made me wonder, like, what is this kid, like, what behaviors is this kid presenting that he can't be in a preschool classroom? And so he had some physical behaviors towards other children the previous year, and this was kind of their strategy, was that if he had a one-on-one support and his day was outside the classroom for the most part, he couldn't have that issue. He could not hurt another student. However, we know that's just kind of protective versus instructive. So we're not providing him with the tools he needs to be able to go into kindergarten. So I really was focused on getting him in the classroom and working on some supports to keep him in the classroom. And not just keep him in the classroom, but teach him why he's in the classroom and get him really engaged. And so I said, I'll be the paraprofessional for a day. I'll come in your classroom and I'll work just with him. And I really didn't know the student that well at that point, but I knew I had enough in my tool bag to be able to provide him. These pictures were not in play yet. This is not a system. But after having conversations with the teacher and talking about how he really needs to have visual support for knowing what's happening and when and how long things are going to last, she created this system, which was really, really awesome. She took this Rubbermaid box lid and put Velcro on it, and she made these tongue depressor mini schedules. So he would have, throughout his whole day, he had to pick a job, and then there was something, I'm sure it fell off, and then a song. And then there was this next part of the day, and the third was lunch, wipe face, throw away. So his whole day was broken into mini schedules, and he would have that mini schedule, and he learned how to use it and how to do complete and take one off and move on to the next, with a lot of adult support at first, but then he had that option. Over here in the first picture, he has a box, and it has one of those like pin things that you put your hand in, and it makes the shape of your hand, and some toys, and he really was reinforced by beef jerky. It was one of his favorite things, and so he would sit in this chair by their designation, and he was in the chair, and we found out how long he could sit, and so then we would reinforce. Through differential reinforcement, he would get provided behavior-specific praise, nice job sitting, and a piece of beef jerky or an access to a tangible while he was sitting during circle time or story time. Because before, 1, he was not there, and 2, when he was, it was just a matter of not restraining, but keeping him there. Wrangling him to make sure he was sitting, make sure he wasn't kicking kids, doing all these things. So now he's sitting because of the reinforcement. He's motivated to be there. And these visual supports are helping him know what's happening. So he's at least paying attention and somewhat engaged. On this side, he had a lot of activities and choices and breaks. So his schedule for work time ended up being that he would work, as it says, like work table or work time. He would work with someone, one of the paraprofessionals, one of the adults in the classroom, and then he would have a break time. And so that was his schedule. He would have a work and then break. And the work, sometimes it would be work at the table, and then he would go to art. And usually it was still teacher prompted. So he did art, break, and then he would go to dramatic play, and he would do the things he was either mastered task with mini schedules, or he would do whatever he could do on his own without that visual support. So he'd do that and then a break. And everything, of course, was on a timer. And the timer was set as soon as he went on break, and then reminders were given so he knew with visual prompts, 1 more minute, 2 more minutes, whatever the countdown you needed to use, and then it was time to come back and do a different center, a different work. So he had another tongue depressor that was just a 2-part, some sort of a work task and a break throughout the entire time. All right. So then we have visual supports that really give information on what to do and how to do it. And when we're going through that, we think about things like this probably is to dress a bear, but really it could be that it could be getting ready to go outside. If you think about when we're putting 18 kids in coats and hats and gloves, it could be we have a visual schedule and we reference that. And so those students who know can do those independently, but maybe put on their gloves before their coats, that would give them more information. Again, this is just like the mini schedule we saw before. Here in the bathroom, we have numbers on the floor. So if I know where to stand or where to sit inside my square, then I will be able to follow that expectation, and you won't have to give me verbal demands constantly. Remember, stand on your square. Oh, keep your hands off your friend. Keep your body, space your body. Where's your bubble? And all those things that teachers say. So this gives me that information. And if I learn this system in the bathroom, then I have this system in the classroom. And a lot of people use symbols to stand on or X's, but they don't really space them enough. And so then I can still touch my friends because I am so close to them. It doesn't give me the information I need. So this, as you can see, is really, really, really working. That kid has his head turned, but he's in his space. He's in his spot instead of just standing in the hallway in a line. And that's not going to work with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds and half with disabilities. And this over here just gives me visual information about my classroom rules. So then I can use a visual prompt to remind you of a classroom rule. Some of the work out of, these are from the Teacher Tools, which is the Head Start Center at the University of Washington, but they also have a lot of work that came out of Vanderbilt, and the Vanderbilt Social Emotional Skills, I know it has a different name, but the Center for Social Emotional Health, basically. They do a lot, and they have modules, and they have downloadable things like Tuck the Turtle, how to take deep breaths, and all of that. So this is just an example that I could have in a kid's toolbox for them to know how to interact and practice those social interactions. Because if I want to play with that student, but I have a real social deficit, it's going to be really challenging for me to go up to them and know how to get their attention. Even if the young boy in the jacket was unable to use verbal interaction, he could still tap a friend on the shoulder or give them a toy, ask them to play by signing or showing a card. So you have to think of the multiple ways to communicate for those students to be really effective. And this isn't, I can gently take my friend by the hand could turn out wrong, but we're going to teach the skill of tapping and what does tapping look like until that's mastered for that student. But we don't want to give up just because, oh, they don't know how to tap. They can't do that. When you say they can't do that, that means you can't teach that. And so you have to think about, if they can't do a skill, how do I teach it? How to communicate your feelings, thoughts, communicate choices. Preschoolers oftentimes have lots of choice boards. For students, you'll have to know whether they can actually discriminate between pictures, and if so, how many pictures can they discriminate with. Emotion faces are important. We talked about theory of mind in the first webinar, and so this is a young kid versus those made-up cartoons or an adult. We want to reference what their friend's face would look like, what their peers would look like, and so teaching emotions is very important. This is a lunch snack board, so you can choose. This is for a kid that they think of that's getting ready to have a meltdown. What can I do to calm my body? There's a lot of times students that, these aren't really research tools, the calming down type activities, but again, if you want some really, really good information on that, check out Vandy's website, and that's Vanderbilt University. Communicating time, if you aren't familiar and you're a teacher of a motivator is a vibrating timer. You can set it on whole or partial intervals, and so if you know you want to check in with a student ever so often or provide behavior-specific praise to your classroom at a specific interval, this will just vibrate, and it'll continually vibrate. Or if you have a student with medical needs that you need to check on and check their levels at a certain time, this will vibrate and remind you to do that. Kitchen timers, we all have used them, but sometimes they're really frustrating because when you forget to turn it past 15, it will not beep. So say Tom's on the computer. Tom loves the computer. And when Tom's on the computer, you say, okay, you have 5 minutes. You set the kitchen timer, and then you go over and say 1 more minute, and then the kitchen timer doesn't go off. And now Tom has had more time on the computer than he really should have. So think about maybe looking into more digital timers, or if they're visually acute, maybe using time timers. Time timers, the red will go away until and when it's gone, the time is up. They have smaller ones, they have giant ones, they have digital ones. Time timers also, you can get some that do make noises.
So thinking about communicating time, because oftentimes we'll say, oh, I'll be there in 1 minute, which means maybe never. Or we don't really communicate well when we're saying how much time we're having. So really putting structure around it is helpful for students with autism. Communicating weight, first teaching weight. So to teach weight, you would say, if you have a motivating item of that student, they love the iPad, which a lot of our students do. You would say, okay, they're reaching for it, they're asking for it, you say, wait, and 1 second later you deliver it. Now it's waiting, and you give them the iPad. You then extend the time you ask them to wait, which only a few seconds, until you're building it up to where they're waiting much longer and you're not immediately giving into the item. So when they understand the concept of wait, because a lot of times parents and teachers will say, oh, wait for a second, and that again means never or maybe or very much later than now. So when they understand wait, then when they have to wait for the bus or wait for mom or wait for a meeting to be over, whatever, I can, and they give these visual prompts on what you can do when you're waiting. The final thing about visual supports before we move on is that you can also set structure a classroom to where centers are closed. I know a lot of times we'll put curtains or you'll cover it with some sort of material, but you can use stop signs, no's. This doesn't automatically mean that your students will understand what it means, that you can't go there, but you teach it. So we learned that a handprint like that means stop, you can't go, or the stop sign means no. So that's a real quick run through of some visual supports. And visuals are prompts. A prompt is anything that's inserted after a direction is given that ensures that the student is more likely to get the correct answer. So we give these prompts, but we have to fade them. And fade down to natural supports. A lot of you, I'm not a list maker, but a lot of people make lists, make grocery lists, have a calendar, make to-do lists. So those are natural supports. You create those supports. They are visual supports, and so going to a foreign place and seeing signs to find, if I go out of the country, the way I find transportation is I look for pictures. So those are visual supports. The way when we go to a new place and we try to go to the restroom, we look for the girl sign or the boy sign, and that tells us something. So we know that visual supports exist in our world, but when we make them specifically for a student and use them specifically for a specific behavior, we must then fade those quickly. Now we're going to talk about stuff that I love to talk about, and I hope that you will take something from it and really implement it in your classroom. So using organizational planning tools in your classroom is very important, one, because it prepares for absences. If I asked you and you were able to verbally respond, who runs your classroom if you're absent? Most likely you would say your paraprofessionals, your teaching assistants, whatever your title is for your staff. And that's so true. And I'm in classrooms of all ages. When there's a substitute and the classrooms I'm in have students with disabilities, that substitute doesn't know what to do. They may have a list of things. They may run some of the classroom. They may run one group, but they really don't know what to do with those students. So in a preschool classroom, they may run circle, but they don't know what to do with those kids with disabilities. They just kind of get through the day. So preparing for absences is that this type of material, especially the staff matrix, will give them information on what they're doing and why. And then really it values each staff member, because it stinks to be on diaper duty literally all week long. Or maybe you've done it week after week after week, and no one has realized that you are the only staff member who has changed that dirty diaper, or you're the only staff member who cleans up after snack and lunch. So we have to really think about is that we're a team and that we're going to spread the wealth, that a paraprofessional can run a circle at any time. If the materials are there, they've seen you do it, they know what to do. It may be that they don't do it exactly like you do, but you need to be able to then go back and clean up after breakfast or whatever your schedule may look like, because you want to value all the staff members. And then maximizing adult support and child interactions. If it's written down what I'm doing, I'm not walking around and looking for something to work on or a kid to interact with. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. Decreases stress, exactly why, because it maximizes my time. And then IEP monitoring is more than anecdotal notes. I know that you have to do the state reporting here in Kentucky. My last year teaching was the first year you had to report that information to the state, and with a lot of anecdotal notes. But we know that anecdotal notes don't provide the information needed to be able to mark adequate progress on a student's IEP at the end of the year. So when we have an IEP matrix or activity matrix, it will be easier for us to embed that IEP data collection. So we're going to go through staff matrices and IEP matrices in zoning. A matrix is just that we're going to have adults at the top or down the side, and then our schedule. So if we think about circle, there are many things that happen. You may have a teacher or a paraprofessional leading the circle, and they have all the materials. You may have someone that has to go and back the circle. And when I say back, I'm referring to that person as kind of being the wingman or wingwoman for the lead. The lead teacher's teaching. It doesn't have to be the lead teacher, but whoever's leading the group has teachers who are then supporting them in any way they need. If they need them to go and turn the lights on and off as if it was having a lightning storm or whatever, they are moving about the classroom, or someone may be cleaning up after someone. A teacher may be designated to prompt certain kids at certain times, to lead a smaller group. Maybe there's 2 circles. So everyone has a duty, and those duties are listed. This is an example I did for a classroom that we worked with. And so if you look at it, you think this teacher during circle time is leading a large group with those written plans that she's created. This person is float and is backing a large group. And then there's an area with students that need more support. What I mean by that is we had 2 students, P/J. P was the morning kid and J was an afternoon kid, and they both had autism. And it ended up that somehow this lead teacher was not very interested in working with those students. So I really focused on paraprofessionals and what they could do for that student, and we created a schedule where it wasn't expected. Not all students have to be at circle the whole time. If your circle is more than 10 to 15 minutes, even typical kids are going to wean interest and not be too engaged in your circle. But in general, those students would go to circle for like 2 minutes, and then they would transition over to the table and do what we'll talk about in the third section, some kind of discrete trial or some one-on-one instruction, and they would transition back to the circle. So they weren't getting burnt out and being just that we're trying to keep them there, because keeping them there is not teaching them anything. So why not have them have a kind of a different structure to their day and an independent schedule? We also were teaching them to check their schedule. So we would constantly have, they had circle on the schedule, they have break on the schedule, they have all these different things that other kids weren't doing, but they were doing what the other kids were doing. They were doing circle time, they were doing small group, just in maybe smaller increments. You can have a staff plan for supporting that one student, which I would not suggest, but this classroom seemed to think that they had other things collected and understood for those students, so we really focused on those 2 target students. All right, so that was really quick on staff matrices, but it's simple. It's something you may not use, but you maybe really, really should try it out. And for your first entry into the next school year, think about what your day looks like, all the things that adults do, and then assign those adults to do that. You could put it on a card, a little card to be put on a lanyard for a teacher. And when you do a staff matrix, think about rotating them. If you have really tricky kids or challenging kids, make sure that one teacher's not with that student, week after week after week, but that you rotate it either week to week, or you have a monthly rotation that rotated every other month, that you still rotate within the weeks. Come up with a rotating schedule. So then your students also get exposure to different adults, because that's going to promote generalization for your students, meaning they can do things under different conditions, under different people with different materials. All right, moving on to zoning and teacher talk. Zoning is really the idea that teachers are assigned to specific areas of the classroom, and they have a way to communicate with each other, but they have assignments in those areas, that they're not just working in the room or going around the room during work time, but they have specific areas. This is an example, and it's a silly example of a zoning map, but it gives you a really visual understanding, in that here's teacher 1 in zone 1, teacher 2 in zone 2, and teacher 3 in zone 3. So if you had 2 teachers, you'd have 2 zones, and maybe zoning wouldn't work as well, but even if you had some teacher on this half of the room and a teacher on this half of the room, you would no longer have to run around. Sometimes classrooms look like teachers are running around with their chickens with their head cut off. They don't know what they're doing, and if I check in and ask them, they still don't know. I say, oh, what are you working on? And they'll say, oh, we're just waiting to see what we're doing for small group. So that creates downtime. Downtime for kids is a really bad idea. So zoning, here's again an example. I use charts a lot for planning. And when we think about it, teacher 1 could be in zone 1 all week. that would be not a problem. But you have to think too, is that an area that's really tricky for some of our students? Is there more prompting that has to happen? Is there that they're really aggressive in those areas and things like that? So why I have this here, Zone 1, manipulatives is part of Zone 1, is letter ID. This is where you can target those state early childhood standards and the things that you have to report to the state, that you aren't just doing them during large group, but that you really are focused and you're able to put it into these one-on-one or small kind of groups that aren't, not during small group, but during work time. So I have a checklist of kids' names and whatever ID letters we're working on, and it's that I'm going to just kind of test those kids and know that we're also going to play with those materials. I'm going to embed instruction, but I'm going to check and see where they are. So we have a gauge and some actual data to inform what kid knows what. And this is just so you can be planful is a word that people use in education that's not a real word, but I like to use it as well, that you're being very systematic and planful on what you're doing in those areas versus just playing. And so that's really why I think it's when play is not enough, in that we want to play with our students. That's when they're working and when they're learning. But if we're playing with them without a plan, we're not planning around that, I'm not making sure that kids are practicing turn taking at the sensory table or turn taking at the block area or whatever the target skill is. And that I could teach multi-step directions at lots of places, but it really fits well with dramatic play, in that if I practice and I'm doing it on Wednesday, then Thursday that I'll hopefully catch those other kids in my area. I'll be really strategic in trying to get there. So some tips is that you want to position your body so you can see your whole zone and see the classroom. So if I'm in the dramatic play and a child is, little girls or boys are cooking for me and giving, taking care of my baby and doing all these things that little kids do, I'm squatted down, I'm at their level, I can still see over the barriers, but I need to make sure my back is not to the classroom. If I'm in the corner, I need to make sure the students have their back to the classroom and I'm facing out, because I want to see my other teachers, what the other kids are doing, if there's an issue I have to attend to, so that I can scan the classroom often and also just my zone, because if I'm working with students in dramatic play, I don't want to monopolize my time in that area. I want to be able to go to my other areas in my zone to give attention to those students as well. And then finally, and sorry that it's 111, shouldn't be like that, I'm going to use teacher talk. And when I was in grad school, I thought this was silly. And now I see how it's really powerful and really informative for what's happening in the classroom. And that if you're across the classroom and you're my paraprofessional or I'm a paraprofessional, you're the teacher, I see you have a lot of kids in your area. I could say, hey, and when I was in grad school, they called each other Teacher Julie and Teacher James and so on and so forth. But it would be like, hey, Miss Smith, looks like you have a lot of friends. How about does anybody want to come play at dramatic play? We're having a great time, or whatever. So that we're having a flow of kids in between each other. So if someone's moving, especially a kid who transitions kind of erratically, or they have some transition issues, that I could say, oh, Teacher Smith, here comes James. He's headed to dramatic play. So then I can help prompt him towards dramatic play, and then that teacher can help him transition all the way in, and then get him started on his, if he has mini schedules, start him on his mini schedules, have his reinforcer box with him. So there's a lot of communication so teachers know what's happening, where kids are going, and it's not like, oh my gosh, where's James? Oh my gosh, where's James? And that happens more often than we would like to say. So that's really the basics of zoning. In this classroom, we can see, the question marks would be that clearly these kids, there's too many teachers at this table. There's a classroom of kids and they probably are well behaved and quiet and all these things, and so they aren't as aware, but if they were spread out, they would be much more effective as professionals. Much like the staff matrix, the IEP matrix is just another effective, efficient way to organize yourself, and that it's going to organize open student objectives. And I say open because students could have way too many objectives, and you can't teach them all at the same time. So you want to think about what objective are we targeting under this annual goal first, and that's what target is going to be on my matrix. And it really informs our professional practice. It doesn't teach me how to teach, but I know that at least I'm targeting those IEP goals ongoing. I'm taking ongoing data, and I'm making sure that they're getting opportunities to respond for their goals.
And I'm going to put these matrices for each area in the areas they belong. So in grad school and in my classroom, since classrooms that I've taught in, I guess I should say, like helping the teachers, I really encourage them to put them on clipboards and hang them in the area. So then I can just pull it off if I'm in the block area and see what kind of goals, what data has been collected that week, what needs to, what type of what objectives need to be embedded right now, and so then I can give those opportunities to respond because I know what's there, versus having to pull it and find it and take it to the right place. That never works. And so data collected and you can graph could be at the end of the day, the end of the week. And I know in early childhood, oftentimes we don't graph our data, but in general, this would be a good opportunity for you to have data and be able to actually plot it on a graph so you can see the change over time, see that the student is making progress or if they're not. So here's an example, and this one is using errorless learning, in that we're going to have teaching trials using simultaneous prompting, which just means that, and we'll talk about this in the next webinar, is that as soon as I give a direction that imitates specific strokes. So I say, do this, and I move my brush back and forth, or something like that, or my car back and forth. And that that student, I'm going to prompt them immediately to do it correctly. Those are teaching trials. So this is just, I'm not taking data on the student behaviors. I'm taking data on, did I do a teaching trial? So I want to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 trials. So I want to get 10 trials, and today I only did 2. So I want to get 10 trials in, as much as for every day that I can. And then I can do testing trials. And testing trials would be that I present the skill, but I do not prompt. And if they do it correctly, I mark it some way. And if not, I go back to teaching. And so this was actually in an infant toddler classroom, and some of the behaviors that are written at the top do not pass the stranger test, are not measurable and observable as well as they should be. But in general, you would have it a shorthand version of your objective, and it would then have your data collection embedded. And if you needed to, you could have even a part that adult says or adult does, and I'll show you what that could look like as well. This was for play court, and so you have students who we know that they're going to respond to greetings from friends, and it kind of gives an example. And so this is the criterion. It does not have the boxes for taking goal data, but you could embed that as well. So these are just giving you reminders of what the student's IEP goals are, and you could know what to do or what to say. So like this one. This one is not an activity specific, but it has a student, their objectives, what the adult can say or do. So for example, we'll follow a 2-part non-routine direction. This one says give directions with 2 actions or 2 description words. That's all I can do. I can only verbally prompt. I mean, I cannot give visuals, I cannot gesture, I cannot physically prompt him to do something. And then like gestural. So I'm going to give her a gesture prompt, and here's some of the ways that she responded. This gives you more information, but just thinking about a way that you're not writing just anecdotal notes, or you're not having to make a new checklist every day, but you could have something that could be a week-long measure for those students' goals. So I want to point out one specific, these all were resources for the visuals. I want to point out one specific resource, and it's not on there. That's unfortunate. Okay, I will add it in and give it to you, but there's a book called Building Blocks, and it's a curriculum type book for preschool, and it definitely is a resource for the next webinar. I discuss it a lot, but in general, think about that, and I'll let you have more information about it in the third webinar, but it just gives you information on how to choose when to give modifications, adaptations, and then into embedded learning opportunities, and finally child-focused explicit strategies. So thanks again for attending, and I have probably a few minutes for any questions. If anybody has any questions. I already answered those. And you know, you can also always, who is the author of Building Blocks? The Building Blocks book is authored by Susan Sandel and Eileen Schwartz. They actually were my professors in grad school, so I may be a little biased, but I feel like when I was a preschool teacher, if I had had that, I would have felt much more prepared, even if I didn't know anything about behavior. I didn't understand any behavioral principles and how to apply those. It really breaks it down in a teacher-friendly way on if these levels aren't working, how do I get to that explicit instruction? and it's informed by a lot of other professionals as well. But someone asked what was the name or link to the Ohio information videos. I will send that out in I'll put it on the discussion board as one of the threads, but it is on the Autism Internet modules. If you Google Ocali, O-C-A-L-I, you can find it, but that's literally the website address, autisminternetmodules.com. And you have to give them your email address, but they do not spam you. Someone says the question is not on the discussion board. I posted it at maybe 11:05, so it should be now. Sorry if you checked before then. I'll make sure that it's there when we close up here. And I want you to remind you that you need to complete the post test questions, and then make sure you also check the discussion board. The question should be posted. It's really just to talk about your professional practice and what you may want to implement or change and adapt. And then you really need to do that to be able to get the certificate if you're seeking CEU'S through the TRIST online program. So if anybody has any questions about that, you can email me, and also if you have any follow-up questions from the webinar. All right. I think we're going to sign off, and I appreciate your attendance, and I hopefully will see a lot of you all next week. I don't